Okay, hello. You may notice I'm in a different location. There is background noise. I apologize. You're just gonna have to live with that. I'm actually in my parents' basement right now. The reason I'm here is they think I am in LA currently with a job. If they find out I'm actually down here, they will kick me out. So don't tell them. So I just want to walk you through some of the directing techniques I use for this action scene, Swordbreaker. It can be applied to pretty much any medium from 2D animation to live action, but I feel that these in-depth, detailed techniques are best suited to stop motion or even 3D animation when you have the highest level of control over every single frame. Now, I don't know if you could tell, but action scenes are my favorite thing to animate. There's something distinctly beautiful about them. It's basically like dancing, you know? Like if you think about it, an action scene is just a dance-off where you don't take turns. Let me just scrub through this thing and find one. Okay, so here's a good one. So you see Meat Slinger firing his laser beam, and Tenja blocks it and slides backward. It's pretty cool looking. Two important techniques right here. Or three, I guess. You could say three. First one is pretty basic. This is just for film in general. It's something called the rule of thirds. If you stick these lines, I'm not sure where I'm not sure where they are right now. Just imagine these things are on your screen. You want the important objects to be on any of these 4 points. Probably missed them all. It's a little more attractive than just sticking something in the middle of the frame. It helps to balance things out, especially when you have more than one thing happening on screen at a time. For instance, 2 dueling characters. So as you can see, Meat Slinger is in one corner, Tenja is in another. As for this actual shot transition right here, this is something a little more important called eye trace. It's especially important for action scenes when things are happening fast because it can be hard to follow otherwise. Basically, when you cut between 2 shots, whatever your viewers are looking at in shot A, it should be in the same position in shot B. As you can see, Tenja's right there at the end of shot A, and at the beginning of shot B, he's in the same place. So you don't have to look at all different parts of the screen to follow him when the shots change. It's also important to maintain direction. Like, for pretty much the entirety of the film, Meat Slinger is on the right, Tenja is on the left. These remain consistent for the most part. Again, it's much easier to follow when you keep it that way. You can usually keep track of this pretty well by following the 180-degree rule. What that means is, imagine a line. You put your characters on one side of the line, you put the camera on the other side of the line, and the camera never crosses that line. So that way, it can go all the way to this angle or all the way to this angle, but it will never cross that 180-degree angle. And that way it'll always keep your characters on the same side of the screen, moving in the same direction. The next thing that happens in this shot is what you would call a cut on action. It's pretty self-explanatory. The cut happens in the middle of the action. While that doesn't necessarily make it easier to follow, it does keep things interesting. It's just not visually appealing when the character finishes doing one thing in shot A and then starts doing another thing in shot B. You want him to start doing something in shot A and finish doing something in shot B. And there's another little stop motion trick I use for my cuts on action. As you can see in this shot, the whole screen is motion blurred between shots. Helps to blend shot A and shot B together. It makes it a little more seamless. The way I do that is I actually just wiggle the camera a little bit while the frame is exposing. Now here's another example of the cut on action happening in tandem with the eye trace. Most people missed it, but there's actually a cut right there. It just looks like the camera zoomed in, but no, that's a cut. In fact, this whole sequence kind of looks like one shot, but it's actually, let me count here. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 shots. The camera's moving through all of them. The eye trace is pretty solid. Everything cuts on action, so it just looks like one. There's another technique I use specific to stop motion. Wherever possible, I like to add motion blur to my characters. Keeps things a little bit smoother, makes it a bit more realistic. Whatever thing is moving in that shot, I just sort of grab it off screen and wiggle it, then hit enter. Alright, and one last technique. I don't think there's a word for this. In fact, I'm not sure this is something I've ever heard talked about before. I may be pioneering this technique. I hope I am. It's unlikely. So here's a good example. Alright, towards the beginning, see Meat Slinger here, pulling back his fist and swinging, taking a big old punch at Tenja. But you may notice at the end of shot A, his fist is past his head. But then, beginning of shot B, his fist is behind his head again. It takes a few extra frames to move past his head. When you play it back at full speed though, it looks fine, it looks natural. I do that fairly often because these action scenes happen so fast, it's just hard to follow what's going on if you don't know what you're doing. But on the other hand, if they're moving too slowly, the stakes don't feel real, the hits don't land as hard. I could learn a thing or two from Dark Souls. Truly, stop motion is the Dark Souls of animation. So I add in extra frames wherever I can, but you don't want them to be moving slower, that just doesn't look good. So instead, you know, I just do this little time warp here. So he's still moving at the same speed, but it just takes him longer to complete the action, if that makes sense to you. You can see the same thing happening right here. He's pulling his fist back to punch, and then the punch begins, but his fist is already past his head. Then in the next shot, though, you can see his fist has gone backwards a few frames, but it carries on as normal. Again, I don't know if this is a technique that people use, but if not, I guess I can name it. I think I'll call it, Chardis, like Charlie TARDIS, because a little bit of time trap. That's horrible. No. Okay, I'll call it Charlie's Wacky Time Warp. You have to call it that now. If you ever use this technique, you have to call it Charlie's Wacky Time Warp. Here's another example of Charlie's Wacky Time Warp. As Tenja's flying into the air, Slinger reaches for his foot and grabs him. Okay, so notice that his hand has almost reached Tenja's foot in the last frame of shot A. His hand is pretty much there already. His fingers are wide open. But then in the next shot, literally one frame later, his hand is much farther back, his fingers are closed, he hasn't opened his hand up yet. Oh, I got a message from my girlfriend, who is real. People tend to ask how much time I spend planning these things out, like do I storyboard them, do I already have every move in my head when I start? But typically no. Like, I'll have the characters, I'll have their weapons, I have the general outcome in mind. Other than that, I don't really plan it, I just go for it. Whenever I storyboard an action scene, it goes completely off the rails. I never follow the storyboards anyway, so why waste the time? With stop motion especially, because these are, you know, physical action figures, physical characters, sometimes they don't quite behave in the way you want them to, and you can't just go back and redraw a few frames like you do in 2D animation. So wherever they end up, that's what I'm working with. So it's kind of like I'm following them, I'm following where they want to go. You know, they make their moves, they tell me what's going on, and I'm like, okay, that's where you want to go, we're doing that. It's a much more organic and natural process that way. It makes the fights feel just that much more real to me. Also, figured I would show you what I'm working on right now. Okay, so the audio is going to change. I'm holding the camera differently. That's just a thing, we're going to have to live with it. I'm working on this little Halo action scene. No, it is not the last colony. Yes, I will finish the last colony. No, you do not need to ask me when I will finish the last colony. And using the techniques I learned from Swordbreaker, I decided that I'm going to make this all one long continuous shot. Usually when I work on stop motion, I will never take a break in the middle of a shot. I always finish between shots, because usually something will change over the few hours I'm gone, like the camera will shift or the lighting will change, and it's very noticeable and it typically ruins the shot. But in this case, I decided if I disguise my cuts with, you know, wild camera moves and motion blur and things like that, you'll never be able to tell. So I'm learning a lot with this one. Mainly I'm learning that this camera does not zoom in nearly as far as I would like it to. Anyway, the camera setup I'm using right now, it's a basic tripod. It's got this nice little winder on the bottom, so I can raise it and lower it pretty steadily. It has a swiveling and tilting head, tightens with this thing, get some nice smooth moves out of that. My favorite part though is this little winder I have mounted up top. You turn the wheel here and it slides very slowly. You can get some beautiful, delicate camera moves out of that. It's like my favorite thing in the world. It's like buttery smooth. So bye, love you.